Council and Commission statements Gender Pay Gap. On behalf of the Council, Mr. Chris Agius will take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, honorable members, Commissioner Jourová. First of all, let me thank you for the opportunity to intervene here today on the topic of the gender pay gap. Equality between men and women is a fundamental principle of the European Union. It is enshrined both in our treaties and in Article 23 of the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights. In 1975, the Treaty of Rome was successfully invoked to defend the rights of an air hostess who worked for the Belgian national airline Sabena. She felt it was unfair that she was paid less just because she was a woman. She demanded equal treatment and won her case in the European Court of Justice. That groundbreaking European Court ruling more than 40 years ago opened the way for the first European directives on gender equality. Mainstreaming this principle in all our activities represents an important mission for the Union. Promoting equal economic independence for women and men, including by closing the income gap, is a crucial element necessary to ensure de facto gender equality. However, as we all know, equality on paper does not always translate into factual equality. The principle of equal pay for work of equal value has long been enshrined in European law. Nonetheless, women in Europe continue to earn, on average, around 16% less than men. In some member states, the gender pay gap is over 20%. And when it comes to pensions, the situation is even bleaker, with a gap of 38.5% on average across the European Union. The causes of the gender pay gap are many. However, an important underlying problem is that society seems to value women's work, paid or unpaid, less than the work of men. Firstly, the sectors employing a majority of women are also those sectors where pay tends to be the lowest. These include care work, clinic services, or cashier work, and so on. Secondly, women tend to be employed in more junior positions compared to men, a phenomenon we call the glass ceiling. Thirdly, often women have less continuity in their careers as compared to men. This is because they so often give up their jobs or reduce their working hours in order to work at home. Finally, there is the crucial issue of lack of transparency in pay. It is hard to fight unfairness when unfairness is hidden. These challenges are common in all member states. However, their extent, dimension and context all differ from one member state to another. This is why the actions that need to be taken in order to address this complex issue of the gender pay gap vary accordingly. Gender equality policies are essential instruments in economic terms. They also lead to greater prosperity, competitiveness, and employment. They increase inclusiveness and social cohesion. Honourable members, what measures should be taken to close the gender pay gap? Greater pay transparency can help the underpaid fight for their rights. Jobs should be classified neutrally and fairly. Also, we must focus on the quality of jobs. While flexibility is important, it should not be forcibly imposed on workers, for example, in the form of precariousness or involuntary part-time work. Moreover, more women are needed to company boardrooms and in other decision-making roles. Finally, we must ensure that both sexes can benefit from the opportunities offered by the digital economy, the green revolution, robotics, and by the many other transformative developments in the labour market. To achieve this, we should start with education, as gender stereotyping starts very early in our lives. We should encourage more girls to study science, engineering, technology and maths. The IT sector, of course, is another area where women are underrepresented and where their talents are needed. We also need to have a closer look at the concept of a correct work-life balance. This can be addressed through a variety of measures, which include better access to childcare and child services for dependents, as well as flexible work arrangements or leave provisions. This is true also for men. In this context, the Council looks forward to the forthcoming initiative from the Commission on improving the work-life balance. Honourable members, I would like to thank the European Parliament for its continuous commitment to maintaining the issue of the gender pay gap on the European agenda. I believe this is an issue on which our two institutions have much common ground. The Council has, in particular in the last 2 years, worked on the gender pay and pensions and on women on poverty. And on Friday, the EPSCO Council will discuss measures to enhance the skills of women and men in the labour market. In this context, ministers will also consider further measures aimed at addressing the gender pay gap. Moreover, in the context of the European semester, the Council will adopt recommendations to improve women's labour market outcomes and to reduce the gender pay gap. To summarise, we must continue to work together. Only by turning words into actions we will succeed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. We've just listened to the statement from the Council. Some recommendations have been made. Now it is time to give the floor to Commissioner Jourová. Thank you very much for coming.
Mr. President, honourable members, equality between women and men is a fundamental value of the European Union, enshrined in the treaty from the very beginning. The Treaty of Rome, whose 60th anniversary we will remember in a few days, already included a provision on equal pay, opening the way for a broader gender equality policy in Europe later on. Over the last 60 years, women have reaped the benefits of education and massively entered into the labour market. 60% of the new graduates today are women. Yet, after undeniable encouraging developments, the gender pay gap seems to have stabilised at 17% in the EU. Compared to men, women are also less likely to be in paid employment, to sign permanent and stable work contracts, and they tend to work fewer hours. The glass ceiling still exists. Although women have made inroads into economic decision-making positions, less than 5% of company leaders are in the EU women. So, it is clear that to finally erase the gender pay gap, we have to do much more. We know the gender pay gap has various root causes, and my aim is to have a set of different measures to effectively tackle these roots. In other words, each of those sources of pay gap require different solutions. In 2014, we adopted a recommendation on strengthening the principle of equal pay between men and women through transparency. We proposed a package of measures which could be adopted by Member States to effectively fight the direct discrimination in pay for the work of equal value. And we work with the Member States to assess how these measures were implemented and how it works in practice. Ladies and gentlemen, I can only share with you that our assessment is that transparency is very important, but it does not do the magic. Discrimination, which means different pay for the same work, is already prohibited by the law in the EU. So we are pushing for better enforcement of the legislation in force. But direct discrimination is unfortunately not the only cause for gender pay gap. We witness the horizontal segregation of the labour market. Women tend to be grouped in sectorial jobs which are underpaid and valued less, such as the social care sector, for instance. And it is our intention to support both women and men to go for the less non-traditional jobs. A good example is the digital sector, which we already heard also here from the presidency. There are only 30% of women, and we know it is the sector of the future. We pay projects to get more girls and women into this sector. And yes, education is the way to solve this problem as well. There is also an issue of part-time jobs. It is clear that during some period of time, people might need to use the working arrangement to better reconcile the work and private duties. However, it should not be a rule that only women are going for part-time jobs, and there needs to be a guarantee for employees who choose the temporary arrangement to resume back to the full-time. And it is one of the provisions we intend to promote in the package of measures to improve conditions for working parents and carers, the so-called work-life balance package, which is a joint initiative with the Commissioner Thyssen. The Commission should adopt this package of legislative and non-legislative measures on the 21st of April. One of the big challenges is the unequal sharing of care responsibilities between women and men. Among the working population, women spend on average 21 hours a week on caring and household activities compared to 9 hours spent by men. It has a lifelong effect on women's careers, earnings and, unfortunately, also pensions, where we have now harmful 40% of pay gap as a reward to women for their lifelong care for their families. So all that shrinks their economic independence. This is not acceptable. All talents must be properly valued and recognized, and a better work-life balance should be sought for both men and women. When providing parents with choice and opportunities, we also aim to eradicate the negative lifelong effect of no choice available on women's careers, earnings and pensions. I already said in one of those plenary sessions when we discussed the pay gap and work-life balance initiative that it is our duty to remove the barriers for the working parents, to combine better work and family duties, and it will be up to free choice of people to use these new opportunities. This is the philosophy which you will see in the package of work-life balance which we are preparing. This is, as you know, one of our initiatives for 2017, and this is also an initiative related directly to the European Pillar of Social Rights. The Commission is also undertaking a number of policy and awareness-raising actions to address the gender pay gap. We initiated, as you know, the European Equal Pay Day. We encourage the exchange of best practices among Member States, and we co-finance Member State initiatives through the structural funds and actions by civil society. Speaking about structural funds, there will be a very rich chapter in the new package on work-life balance to encourage the Member States to use better and more intensively the EU structural funds for creating more and better and affordable social care facilities, be it creches, kindergartens, be it the facilities for caring for seniors, because this money should serve to people. I cannot imagine many more and better opportunities to use this money for a really good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I am looking forward for the debate with you. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We've listened to two statements, and now we have a clearer idea. Both statements overlapped in many respects. what we understand is that the Council and the Commission will play their roles. Thank you very much, Commissioner, again. Before I bid farewell to you, I'd like to thank you for the last 60 minutes. There will be no blue cards, however. And to kick off the debate, and I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Elisabeth KÖSTINGER on behalf of the EPP. Thank you very much again.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, equal pay for equal work should be obvious in the 21st century, but unfortunately, as you've said, Commissioner, that is not the case. There are still differences, and this is really a challenge to all of us. We have to look at the causes of this within Europe, and we also need to close the pay gap. I think that the lack of women in technical jobs is one of the factors, and it's something that people have already talked about. This is something that we need to tackle in education and training. We need to encourage women to take on jobs that are very much in demand across Europe. But women often hold back professionally because they have additional burdens with the family and children, and they're responsible, have those responsibilities. And so for that reason, I think it is important that we have social provisions to provide support for women. And I think we also need to take into account that this is something that some women want to do. Some women want to stay home and look after children, and I think that is something that we need to value more as well. But often women are quite reticent when it comes to wage negotiations as well, and I think we need to give young girls the confidence to fight for these rights. And then you talked about the pensions gap as well, and that's something that we see, and we need to close that gap because poverty for older people is something.
Ich muss Sie wirklich darum.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Köstinger. We're already late, so can I ask everybody to stick to the time which has been allocated to each group? I think it's very important because we have quite a few points that we still want to deal with. And let me give the floor now on behalf of ALDE to Mrs. García Pérez for 1 minute 30.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. No one can claim to live in a modern society if we hear the kind of figures that we've heard, which show that women tend to earn 17% less than men for the same job in Europe. And we're talking about an average because there are some countries, such as mine in Spain, where reports recently have said that our pay gap is 23%. These figures, however, should make us realize that we need more ambitious policies to actually reduce the gap. If we continue at this rate, then according to the data, our grandchildren will only have reached equal pay in 70 years. So we're aware of the fact that we need to set very clear objectives. What about a reduction of 2% in every country every year of the pay gap? Now, it's very important to check the situation, to make sure people are complying with it. We need audits. And what about the role that we give to the social partners to prevent this situation? Now, a society cannot say it's fair if women are suffering such inequality as is the case in the EU now.
Dankeschön. Erlauben Sie eine blaue Karte?
Thank you. Would you accept a blue card?
Herr
Thank you.
Korwin Mikke.
Do you know Do you know which was a place in the Polish theoretical physics Olympiad? The first place of women, of girls. I can tell you, 800. Do you know how many women are in the first 100 of chess players? I tell you, no one. And of course, women must earn less than men, because they are weaker, they are smaller, they are less intelligent, and they must earn less. That's all.
Dankeschön. Bitte.
Thank you very much.
García Pérez.
Mrs. García Pérez.
Mire, señor diputado.
Well, according to what you're saying and according to your theory, I wouldn't have the right to be here as a Member of Parliament. And I know that you're very upset and very concerned about the fact that we women can represent citizens on an equal footing with you. Now, I think I need to defend European women against men like you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, you're quite right. Mrs. Sinanska for 1 minute for the ECR.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne za slovo.
Thank you for the floor, Chair, Commissioner. In Slovakia, I often meet people who would probably not be interested in the debate about the gender disadvantages, yet gender inequality concerns them deeply, and in practical terms, they work in demanding professions. They are nurses, teachers, professional and non-professional caregivers. We shall not try to find out why they had decided for these specific professions, but I'd like to use this short time window to share my personal experience. I know many stories when only their own personal experience showed the fathers of families, the men, the truth. The best investment for a happy society in the future is into decent wages of those who take care of children, the elderly or disabled. I'd be glad if the topic of gender and inequality will not be solely a topic for women. We need fathers, husbands, MEPs, politicians who will fight for these better conditions together with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. MLINAR on behalf of ALDE for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. I think we need to stop believing in the myth of equal opportunities. It's simply not happening. Equal pay for equal work is one of the basic principles of the European, which has been in the treaty since 1957, but nevertheless there's a gender pay gap in every single member state. In many countries, they have a special day where they recognize when people are getting, and in Austria it's the 4th of March, and in the rest of Europe it's the 2nd of March. So basically women are working 60 or 61 days as if they're not getting paid compared to men. And as the Commissioner has said, pensions for women are often 40% less across the EU. So you see, it starts in the cradle and ends.
Thank you. For the GUI, Mr. Pimienta Lopez for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A week on from a vitally important date in the history of women's liberation, we have to look at issues like casual work and a pay gap. People in the textile industry, for example, have lost their jobs as that industry has collapsed. Wage discrimination, direct and indirect, has a cause. It doesn't happen spontaneously. Capital exploits women. and uses the pay gap for its own advantage. This is happening in the member states. It's part of the attack on collective bargaining and forcing wages down, and the offence on the rights of workers in general and women workers in particular. We can only sort this out if we put an end to casualisation, put an end to class-based legislation, and make certain that we have a guarantee of equal pay for equal work, and make sure that people's wages and lives are protected. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Greens, the EFA, Mr. URTASUN, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I think the Commissioner has very well described the situation, the 17% pay gap in the EU. If we include all revenue, it's 40%. Now, things aren't changing. We've come to a standstill, but it all depends on what kind of reforms we've made to the labour market in the last years. Obviously, there's a problem with part-time work, which has a huge impact on unemployment money and pension, and we have a 40% gap in pensions. But I think what we need to do is very bold. Transparency on the part of companies is very important, but in particular we need a strong agenda of gender equality. The council representative has said that if there were more women in top posts, that would be better. But there is a directive about company leadership that's actually been put on ice, so it would be good if you could tackle it once again. That might help.
Dankeschön für die Fraktion.
Thank you very much. For ENF now, Mrs. Kappel, for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, the participating women is increasing, but generally in my country, Austria, it is a country in which women contribute the least to the household income. 20%. So in Austria, per hour, women are earning 1/5 less. So no equal pay for equal work, and it's even more if you take that into account on an annual basis. It's 2/5 less than men, and there are a lot of reasons for this. There are fewer women in management, there are fewer women in leading roles, and women are often doing unpaid important work like looking after children. They often have part-time work, they often have to have breaks in their career, and they're responsible for looking after the children. But we need to attack this at all political levels so that we can do away with these differences. Thank you.
Bei den weiteren
Now, first of all, Mrs. Záborská for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commissioner. Nobody in this Parliament or in the public space would defend the pay gap between men and women doing the same job. This certainly is good news, and we should stress this, if necessary, even repeatedly. Slightly less good news is that even though this Parliament has been adopting various resolutions trying to decrease the pay gap between men and women, for 11 years now there hasn't been sufficient political will to amend the directive 2006/54/EC on the implementation of the principle of equal opportunities and equal treatment of men and women in matters of employment and occupation. This is frustrating not only for me as an MEP dealing with this topic, but especially for all those women and mothers facing the pay gap and who don't have effective instruments to fight it, to defend themselves. This will not change unless we find the answer to the overall question of the future of the EU that has been discussed already at the outset of this plenary sitting. Because what measures will be taken, whether any will be taken at all, to fight this pay gap, will very much depend on which one of the Jugend scenarios we will choose in the end. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner, I welcome the Commission's determination to fight the gender pay gap. Unfortunately, we must admit that despite all our efforts, this situation hasn't changed. Unequal pay is a multifaceted problem. Therefore, in addition to transparency of pay, I would like to first call upon our colleagues in national parliaments to lay down a clear definition of equal pay. Moreover, it is also important to define what equal work is, because we have no definition of equal work at the EU level, and there are no clear criteria that would allow us making comparisons between different types of work. A possible way of defining equal work would be to use gender-neutral systems of job assessment and classification. Unequal pay may also be a reflection of inequality on the labour market, which is more likely to be experienced by women, especially when it comes to difficulties in trying to reconcile work and family life. Women are more likely to be in part-time employment and to interrupt their professional careers, which limits their possibilities of lifelong learning and professional development. Madam Commissioner, I would like to call upon you to present an appropriate legislative and non-legislative package as soon as possible for reconciling work and family life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Wiśniewska for 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. May I draw your attention to Poland? For many months now, European institutions are enjoying a witch hunt against my country. And also some cliches about the situation in Poland are circulating. Same applies to the political situation. These are only innuendos. And the recent report of PricewaterhouseCoopers is a clear case in point. And this clearly says that Poland is in the avant-garde of countries of the pay gap of only 7%. Now, the PwC clearly states that if we maintain this trend of changes, the pay gap will be removed as soon as 2021. So we'll be probably at the top of the list in the OECD countries. This is gender equality. Facts, not lies. We have been successful, and you can follow our success.
Nun hat Frau
Now, Mrs. Harkin has the floor for 1 minute.
The gender pay gap is the difference between what women and men earn on average per hour before tax. In general, women are not paid less than men for the same work because that's illegal under EU law. Nonetheless, the gender pay gap is real, even when you factor in the difference in hours worked between men and women, and that gap is especially wide in low-paid jobs. A recent study in Ireland showed that in 2015 we had a 14.8% difference in median pay between women and men, and crucially that gap has widened by 80% since 2012, when it stood at 8.3%. This impacts all of women's lives, with the knock-on negative effects on their pensions. The causes of the gender pay gap are complex. We have identified them. Now we need to address them. An overarching way of doing this is to strengthen gender mainstreaming approach throughout the entire life cycle and ensure work-life balance.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Now for 1 minute, Mr. Martin.
Débattre aujourd'hui sur les écarts de rémunération.
Talking about the wage gap between men and women is both vitally important and a waste of time. Vital because it's important that we bridge this gap. At the moment it's far too large, 9%. But it's a waste of time because 9% only reflects part of the sad reality. The annual wage gap amounts to 25% in net terms if one bears in mind part-time and professional segregation. In 2015, I already spoke out against women obliged to take part-time, so they make €700 a month below the poverty line in France, and a large number of women work in part-time today. Segregation, professional segregation, the fact that men and women don't work in the same sectors, don't have access to the same jobs, to the same level of responsibility, also has a large influence on the wage gap. Let's also speak out against exploitation of all these women. In a big company, cleaning services, or other things which have derived from globalization.
Frau KOZŁOWSKA-RAJEWICZ, bitte schön.
Mrs. Záborská.
Państwo.
KOZŁOWSKA-RAJEWICZ.
Rozmawiamy o luce.
Today we're discussing the pay gap. This allows us to monitor the situation and also make any assessments that are needed in the member states about the situation of women. Now, the pay gap clearly illustrates only a part of economic differences between men and women. This pay gap, which is used in statistics, is just a reflection of the difference of hourly pay, pay per hour, in a given sector of the economy. This does not include any extra for example, overtime pay, additional projects which have been implemented, some bonuses or perks like the company car, and these are not typically used by women. If we were to compare the pay between men and women, we'll need to look into their tax returns. Then we'll have a better insight into the differences between men and women on the labor market. And this gap is at the level of 38% in the European Union, similar to the pension gap. Commissioner, I would like to plead with you to make sure that we use this pension gap as an indicator for the differences between men and women.
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute, Mrs. Piciano.
Frau Picierno.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. Today is the 1st of March, colleagues. And if we think about it, it's the first day that most women are actually going to be paid this year. Not because they've been on holiday from New Year till now. That's not the reason why they haven't been paid. But rather, if you take into account equal pay for equal work, that's because they've worked for free for the first 2 months. That's what all the studies say that present the situation on the pay gap. Now, in our rich Europe, we do still have these huge differences. And these are completely unacceptable, as you've all said. It's also unacceptable that these differences should be reduced at such a slow pace. If we stay at this pace, it's going to take 80 years to have equal pay for equal work. It might be our grandchildren who are benefiting from that. So the Member States and the Commission...
Thank you very much. And now for 1 minute 30, Mrs. Girling. I'm sorry, I really have to ask you to stick to the speaking time because we're really going far beyond the time that's been allocated. Mrs. Girling.
Thank you. Equal pay for equal work is one of the European Union's founding principles, and every member state is bound to ensure that the principle of equal pay for male and female workers for equal work or work of equal value is applied. But as Marian Harkin said, actually making sure this happens is only half of the problem. What we really have here, and the reasons behind the gender pay gap, are complex. They overlap, and there is no one solution to this issue. But there is no doubt, absolutely no doubt at all in my mind, that the gender pay gap is caused by direct discrimination. Segregation in the labour market, traditional gender stereotypes and work-life balance. And when combined, all these serve to reinforce gender inequality on a much, much broader scale. The impact of the pay gap extends even beyond retirement, as we've heard. The at-risk of poverty rate is around 22% for women over 65, reflecting the inequality of pay. So what can we do? It's time that we took real action. We must give the right for flexible work to all jobs. We must create a more effective policy on shared parental leave, with fathers getting at least 3 months paid leave. And we must provide a mandatory scheme that includes funded training for women over 40 who've done their duty in society, as they see it, to get back to work. Society must take responsibility for that.
Dankeschön, Frau Hed.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Haid, for 1 minute.
Alla här I kammaren vet, eller borde veta.
Now, here, people should be aware that the wage gap is between men and women is huge, particularly when we think about the fact that it's 2017 and the principle was put into the treaties 60 years ago in 1957. So it should go without saying that women will get paid the same as men. But women are doing most of the part-time work. They have precarious jobs, and according to the latest statistics, there's an increase in part-time work, and women, when are doing about 39 hours unpaid work when they have children under the age of 7, and men are only doing about 15 hours of unpaid work. In Sweden, we'll only have equality in 22 years from now, even though we're seen as a front runner. But we need to act now. Thank you very much. Mr. Frunzulică, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, allow a man colleague to speak about gender pay gap. Although women have as good or better qualification than men in many occasions, often their skills are not valued the same as men's, and their career progression is slower. This results in an average gender pay gap of 16% in the European Union. Along years, this also results, among other factors, into a gender pension gap of around 39%. This situation is not acceptable and has to be addressed as soon as possible. Equality between men and women is one of the fundamental values of the European Union, but this day reminds us that it is not one of its fundamental realities. We must cut the gender pay gap by 2% each year over the next 5 years. The 2006 Directive on Equal Pay for Work of Equal Value, recast directive, provides guidance for member states. But I believe it is fundamental to have a revision of the recast directive to introduce mandatory transparency of pay reports, gender action plan in companies, and audits to reduce the gap. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much to all of the speakers. And now let's move on to Catch the Owl. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. CORAZZA for 1 minute.
Chair, to achieve equal pay for equal work is a top opportunity for priority for women empowerment. A lack of progress is frankly frustrating. Gender pay gap is a challenge throughout Europe in all kinds of jobs. Even in Sweden, my country, a champion of gender equality, women earn in their lifetime 300,000 euro in average less than men. So what to do? There is no one-size-fits-all solution. It is a structural problem that needs to be dealt from different angles and nationally. Member States have to ensure that women have equal career opportunities in all fields. And this includes care facilities for children and a culture of shared family responsibility between men and women, and to facilitate and encourage women entrepreneurship and fight discrimination. The private sector, where gender pay gap is more common, should take its share responsibility. It is important, Madam Chair, that we join forces at all levels to raise awareness, putting pressure on Member States to take concrete actions and share best practices. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dankeschön, Frau Chinnici.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chinnici, for 1 minute.
Grazie Presidente. In questi anni
Thank you, Madam President. Many efforts have been made to reduce the gender pay gap over the last few years, and the data is encouraging, but it doesn't go far enough. Women between the ages of 30 and 35 today have, despite their very high level of education, they're more qualified than ever before and probably more qualified than the men. But 63% of them are at work, and as opposed to 75% of men. And this also is something that can be seen in terms of the pay gap, which of course feeds into a pension gap as well. We need policies to change this course, to help women in their attempts to balance work and family life, but in particular invest in education, so that we can get rid of discrimination and prejudice, which all too often leads to this pay gap between men and women. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Tomasic, for 1 minute.
Hvala lijepa, gospođo predsjedavajuća.
Thank you, Chair. Women as mothers and wives are pillars of every family, but their crucial role in the family home should not in any way preclude their professional fulfillment. Sadly, many women at the work market find very many forms of discrimination which should not find place in a civilized world. The European policy tends now to equate men and women, make them the same, which I think is unnatural and counterproductive. We are different, and these differences should be taken into account. But where no difference, where we carry out the same jobs, we should have the same working condition and also the same pay. Thank you.
Dankeschön, Frau.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bilbao, for 1 minute. Thank you, President, Commissioner. I think we have an understanding of just how bad the problem is, and to celebrate the Day of Women Getting Pay, I want to say that we have to work hard to overcome the pay gap. The expression in euros of the pay gap is only part of the price we pay, and we lose so much talent because of this inequality. The pay gap between men and women is how inequality translates into the labour market. To overcome it, we need to face our responsibilities, both in the home as well, in the workplace, and make sure that we have a merit-based approach, not a gender-based approach. We have to solve these problems. We have to change our attitudes. That way, otherwise women will work less for less pay and will pay less taxes. Now, today's debate is very telling. Only 4 men have participated, one of them to insult us. So people need to change their attitudes. It's everyone's problem. It's a social problem for men and women.
Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who've asked for the floor, but because of a lack of time, unfortunately, I cannot give the floor to anyone else. So can I ask Mrs. Jourová for your closing remarks, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, yes, gentlemen also are here still. I think we all agree that equal pay is first of all a matter of elementary fairness, and that the fact that still we have this pay gap, average 16–17%, this also shows, among other things, the lack of respect to women, which is so deeply rooted in traditions and stereotypes. So we need to be smart in introducing the combination of legislative and non-legislative measures to gradually change the situation and the conditions. Yes, we heard here several men. The one who offended all of us reminded me of my discussion which I had last year in New York with one African minister who had very similar opinions. And I realized how happy I am that I live in Europe, which is, although we have all the problems which we discussed here, which is a good address for women, because vast majority of us agree that there must be full respect to women and no reason for keeping the pay gap. This is, of course, a matter of fairness, but also keeping the pay gap and keeping the barriers for women to combine better the family duties and work is a matter of alarming economical short-sightedness, because we have very telling figures showing that not to enable women to go to work if they want to combine work with their family duties, of course with better help of men, it is a very unwise wasting of talents. I am in a very frequent contact with IT companies. They desperately call for talents. They need talents. They need innovations. They need fresh thinking. And they seek for women in this sector. Also, they seek for women because the women have a better consumer way of thinking. Women are up to 70% measured by the volume of money invested consumers. So this is a quick demand to have more women better educated for this sector. Also, speaking about those economical factors, and we need to speak about them, because when we only speak about this problem as a gender problem, ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry to say it, but it will not fly. Because still the argument of unfairness is, I don't know why, not strong enough. But speaking about economical factors, society needs children. We heard today the figures in our new white book. The demographic line in Europe is really alerting, and we need to think about this. We need, our societies, our economies need to harvest what was invested into education of women. It's so short-sighted not to help women to use their education in better jobs. I could continue this economic argumentation. I will just tell you two figures. We see that keeping the barriers for women to go to work if they want costs in some member states up to 5% of GDP. This is a telling figure. Another figure which I not use very often, but understanding that economic dependence of women on men is the way to violence against women. We also have a figure which says how much this horrible phenomenon, horrible practice in EU costs. We have the calculation that it is 260 million euro per year in Europe. This is the cost of violence against women. I could continue. I know we don't have much time, so I will just finalize that I take this very seriously, this gender pay gap. I understand all that complexity of this, and I can only repeat that we need to take all the sources of the pay gap and to come with the smart, well-targeted measures to get rid of it as soon as possible. Maybe we could discuss further whether there is the need for bigger sanctions, whether there is the need to encourage the victims of discrimination to complain more often, and so on. There are very concrete measures which we want to introduce. Thank you very much.
Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now I'll give the floor to Minister Agius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once more for this timely and useful debate. It has shown once again the complex but pressing nature of this problem. A cross-cutting, life course approach is needed. Each measure we take in each policy area is a part of the puzzle. The Presidency had decided to focus in particular on the issue of skills. On Friday, the Council will adopt a set of conclusions on enhancing the skills of women and men in the European Union labour market. Improving the skills of women will improve their situation on the job market and, later on, in retirement. It is a necessary step on the road towards equal economic independence, and in its conclusions, in the context of the European semester on the annual growth survey and the joint employment report, the Council will note that more visibility should be given to the gender pay gap and the gender gap in coverage of pensions, and that more efforts should be made to reduce them. Thank you once again for your attention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes the debate. And now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is a statement by the Vice President of the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and on the recent partial decriminalization of domestic violence in Russia. Mrs. Mogherini is not able